It's a marshmallow world in the winter, when the snow blankets the ground, soft and pure. But behind the beauty of this serene scene lies a story, a tale of fame, laughter, loyalty, and deep betrayal. For decades, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were more than just icons. They were the rulers of a golden era. They were the heartbeat of Hollywood, the kings of the Las Vegas Strip. These two legends walked into every room, every stage, with an undeniable presence, making the world stop and watch. Their friendship seemed unbreakable, built on shared laughter, fortune, and fame, mixed with countless nights of mischief, chaos, and endless charm. It was a bond that felt like something out of legend, often compared to the camaraderie of blood brothers. But as the years passed, the shining facade they had carefully crafted began to crack. What seemed like an eternal, unshakable friendship began to fracture, hidden from the world, until one day it shattered completely. Out of nowhere, Dean Martin vanished from Frank Sinatra's life. Gone, no goodbye, no explanation. He walked away, leaving behind a silence where there had once been an undeniable brotherhood. Fans were left in shock, and whispers of confusion filled the air. The truth was locked away, hidden for years, and the world was left with only questions, rumors, and speculation. What could have been so painful, so deep, that it tore apart one of Hollywood's most iconic and beloved friendships? For over 30 years, the world waited for answers. Even after Dean's passing, the truth slowly began to surface. Dean had his reasons, and those reasons ran far deeper than anyone could have ever imagined. Born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in the tough, steel-filled town of Steubenville, Ohio, Dean's story didn't begin in the spotlight. It began with grit, with survival, with unrelenting hard work. His father, Gaetano, an Italian barber, worked tirelessly behind a small chair, cutting hair for hours on end to keep food on the table. His mother, Angela, a proud Italian-American woman, was the backbone of their family, holding everything together through sheer willpower, strength, and love. Dean's childhood was not one of luxury or privilege. He grew up learning to fight, both physically and metaphorically. Barely speaking English as a child, he carried the weight of insecurity, constantly feeling like an outsider, never quite fitting in. With an older brother, William, and almost no money, Dean learned early on that survival wasn't about luck or fate. It was about grit, determination, and the willingness to push forward when everything around him seemed to be working against him. At just 15 years old, Dean entered the brutal world of boxing, taking on the name Kid Crocetti. There were no fancy gloves, no sleek gear, just raw fists, gritty determination, and a relentless will to fight, even when the odds were stacked against him. The punches left their mark, broken noses, split lips, and a body that bore the scars of every battle. Dean often joked that he lost nearly every fight, but in truth, those losses were the ones that shaped him. They made him stronger, they toughened him, and they prepared him for whatever wild road lay ahead. Because the truth was, Dean kept getting back up when most people would have stayed down. He had that fighter's fire inside him, a spirit that could never be extinguished. The next chapter of his life led him to New York City, the city of dreams, of hunger, and hustle. Dean shared a tiny, crammed apartment with his buddy Sonny King, and together they scraped by, doing whatever it took to survive. They were so broke that they charged neighbors to watch them box bare-knuckle in their living room. It wasn't glamorous, but it was raw, real, and completely unscripted. Their shows were wild and unpredictable, filled with blood, sweat, and laughter. One night, Dean knocked Sonny out cold in the first round, and the crowd went wild. This little act, this impromptu entertainment, spoke volumes about who Dean was, a man who could turn desperation into spectacle. But boxing wasn't his only battle. As the dream of becoming a professional boxer faded, Dean didn't stop fighting. Instead, he embraced whatever life threw at him. He worked in a hidden gambling room tucked away behind a tobacco shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Yet no matter how dark or dangerous the hustle got, one thing remained constant: his voice. As Dino Martini, inspired by the opera stars he admired, Dean poured his heart into every song he sang. He performed with local bands, and slowly but surely his voice began to resonate, smooth, warm, and captivating, the kind of sound that would later define him as a legend. His big break came when he joined the Ernie Mackay Orchestra in the late 1930s. By the early 1940s, his voice was gaining attention, rich, aching, full of soul. Then in 1940, bandleader Sammy Watkins offered him one simple piece of advice that would change everything. Drop Martini and go with something simpler. A name that was smoother, more memorable, Dean Martin. That one small change set him on a new course, a new path towards stardom. By 1943, Dean was back in New York, chasing the spotlight. The war had briefly pulled him into the army, but a hernia cut that stint short, and he was sent home after just 14 months. To him, it wasn't a setback, it was simply another twist in the road. The stage was still calling, and Dean Martin wasn't about to stop answering. Love entered Dean's life in October of 1941, when he married Elizabeth "Betty" McDonald. Betty was the woman who saw his potential long before the world did. Together, they built a modest life in Cleveland Heights, far from the glitz of Hollywood. They had 4 children, but as time passed, the pressures of fame and ambition began to chip away at their marriage, and by 1949, their relationship quietly dissolved. But Dean Martin never took the easy road. From a broke boxer in Ohio to a rising star in the music world, he had lived more in his first few decades than most could imagine. Even as the 1940s wore on, Dean continued to push forward, driven by that fire inside him, always hustling, always fighting. It wasn't until his time in New York, still struggling to break through, that fate finally smiled upon him. In 1944, Dean met a fast-talking comedian named Jerry Lewis. It was a meeting that seemed small at first, just 2 entertainers passing in the night, but there was a spark, a raw chemistry that neither could ignore. By 1946, they took a chance together and hit the stage at the 500 Club in Atlantic City. Their debut didn't go as planned. The crowd was silent, unresponsive. But with nothing left to lose, they threw out the script, trusting their instincts. Dean's smooth, effortless charm played perfectly against Jerry's chaotic, larger-than-life energy. And just like that, the crowd went from silent to roaring. The magic was born. From that night on, Martin and Lewis became unstoppable. Their act wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, alive, and completely electric. Dean kept his cool while Jerry spun around like a whirlwind. The audience didn't just watch, they were pulled into the madness. From that moment forward, the two were untouchable. Their partnership changed comedy forever. Because the truth was, Dean Martin kept getting up when most people would have stayed down. His resilience wasn't just a characteristic, it was the very essence of who he was. It was that unyielding, fighter's fire deep inside him, a spirit that refused to quit, no matter the obstacles in his way. He fought for everything he had, and New York City, with all its raw energy and promise, became the next battleground in his relentless pursuit of success. The city of dreams, of hunger, of hustle beckoned him. Dean shared a cramped apartment with his good friend, Sonny King, and together they fought to make ends meet, carving out their place in a world that seemed to care little for the underdog. They were so broke that they resorted to charging neighbors to watch them box bare-knuckle in their living room. The small, dingy apartment transformed into an impromptu stage for wild, unpredictable entertainment. It was reckless, it was chaotic, but it was also incredibly real, and it was here in the most desperate of circumstances that Dean's true character began to shine. He was a man who could turn struggle into something people couldn't look away from. One night in a packed room full of neighbors, Dean knocked Sonny out cold in the first round, and the crowd went absolutely wild. It wasn't just about boxing. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about taking life's hardest punches and making them into something unforgettable, turning desperation into spectacle. But boxing wasn't the only battle Dean was facing. When the dream of becoming a professional fighter faded, Dean didn't back down. He dove into the shadows, taking any odd job he could find just to survive. One of those jobs took him into a hidden, illegal gambling room tucked away behind a tobacco shop. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a dream come true, but it was something that kept him alive and moving forward. And even in the darkest moments of those years, one thing remained constant: his voice. As Dino Martini, a name he chose in homage to an opera idol he admired, Dean began to sing. It wasn't just performing, it was his soul laid bare in every note. He poured his heart into every song, each word heavy with emotion, each note resonating with the hunger to be seen, to be heard. He performed with local bands, perfecting a smooth sound that would eventually become his signature, a voice that could both soothe and captivate. His big break came when he joined the Ernie Mackay Orchestra in the late 1930s. By then, his voice was already starting to turn heads, rich and deep, catching the attention of anyone who heard it. Dean was more than just a man with a good voice. He was a force that commanded attention. In 1940, bandleader Sammy Watkins, who recognized Dean's potential, told him to drop the martini and go with something simpler, something smoother. He suggested Dean Martin. It was a small change, but one that would mark the beginning of a whole new chapter in his career. By 1943, Dean was performing across New York City, and whispers of his name began to buzz in the entertainment world. His path to stardom seemed inevitable. The Army drafted him during the war, but a hernia cut his service short, and after just 14 months, he was sent home. It could have been a setback, but to Dean, it was simply another detour in the road to success. Then love entered his life. In October of 1941, Dean married Elizabeth Betty MacDonald, a woman who believed in him when he was still just a man with a dream and a whole lot of uncertainty. She saw the potential before anyone else did. Together, they built a modest life in Cleveland Heights, far from the flashing lights of Hollywood. They had 4 children and worked to keep a sense of normalcy in their home. But fame and ambition, as they often do, began to take their toll. As the years passed, the weight of Dean's rising career strained their marriage, and by 1949, their relationship quietly dissolved. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive. It was just a quiet ending to a chapter that had once been filled with hope and promise. In the years that followed, Dean kept fighting. The early struggles, the sacrifices, the small-time gigs and hidden rooms, those moments of struggle had shaped him into the man he was becoming. Dean Martin was no longer just a fighter in the ring or a man hustling for a break. He was becoming an icon, and the road ahead, though still uncertain, was clear with potential. His voice, once an instrument of survival, was now his ticket to the world. But Dean Martin never did things the easy way. From a broke boxer in Ohio to a rising star in the music world, Dean had already lived a lifetime by the time most people were still chasing their dreams. The 1940s were filled with struggles, yet Dean's relentless determination and undeniable talent kept him moving forward, pushing through the hardship after hardship. His journey was never simple, but it was always authentic, defined by perseverance and a refusal to give up. It wasn't until his time in New York, still struggling to get noticed, that fate finally smiled upon him. It happened in 1944 when Dean crossed paths with Jerry Lewis, a fast-talking, wild comedian whose energy was as unpredictable as it was magnetic. Their first interaction was brief, a fleeting exchange between 2 men who seemed to be moving in different directions. Yet there was an undeniable spark, a chemistry neither could ignore. By 1946, they teamed up, joining forces to create an act that would go on to become one of the most iconic duos in entertainment history. Their debut at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, however, didn't go as planned. The crowd sat in stunned silence, unmoved by their performance. The tension in the room was palpable, but with nothing left to lose, Dean and Jerry threw out the script, trusting their instincts and allowing their raw, unscripted energy to take over. Dean's effortless charm, combined with Jerry's chaotic, larger-than-life presence, turned their act into something electric. The crowd, initially cold, was soon roaring with laughter. The magic was born that night. From that moment on, Dean and Jerry were unstoppable. Their act was raw, untamed, and completely alive. Dean's smooth, calm demeanor balanced Jerry's explosive energy, creating a dynamic that captivated audiences wherever they went. They became the stars of the biggest clubs, the most popular radio shows, and the most coveted television spots. Yet as they soared to new heights, cracks began to form in their relationship. What had once been a partnership rooted in friendship and mutual respect began to change. Dean, who had always played the straight man, began to feel overshadowed by Jerry's larger-than-life antics. The pressure of their fame, the relentless public attention, and the burden of being in each other's constant orbit began to tear at the seams of their friendship. By 1956, exactly 10 years after their debut, their partnership came to an end. The world watched as Dean and Jerry's act dissolved, but even in the wake of their split, the influence they had on the entertainment industry was undeniable. Dean, never one to shy away from reinvention, continued to evolve. He embraced sophistication, trading in the chaos for the class and confidence that would come to define his new image. With sharp suits, an effortlessly smooth voice, and a swagger that couldn't be imitated, Dean was ready to step into a new chapter of his life. His acting career skyrocketed, and movies like The Young Lions proved to the world that Dean was more than just a comedic he was a serious actor, capable of depth and range that surprised even the harshest critics. His transition from comedy to drama was nothing short of remarkable, cementing his place in Hollywood as one of the most versatile performers of his time. Then came the moment that would change everything: Frank Sinatra. When Dean met Frank, it was more than just a friendship. It was the beginning of something legendary. The two shared an instant, magnetic bond. They had similar talents, similar swagger, and a shared attitude that made them both larger-than-life figures in a world that adored their kind. Together, they dominated the Las Vegas nightlife, transforming the city into their own personal kingdom. With the rest of the Rat Pack by their side, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, they created a legacy that would go on to define an era. Their friendship became the stuff of Hollywood legend, two kings reigning over a world full of flashing lights, endless parties, and untamed spirits. But as with all things, cracks began to appear in their perfect world. Behind the glamour, beneath the wild nights of laughter and champagne, there were moments of darkness, of conflict that no one saw coming. Dean, always the quiet one, began to feel the weight of it all: the pressure, the fame, the constant attention. What had once been a rock-solid friendship now felt heavy, as if something had shifted. The bond they had was tested in ways neither of them expected. Dean's departure from Frank's world came quietly, without warning. The public was left confused, wondering what had happened. The world never received a full explanation. Instead, there were only whispers, unanswered questions, and the silent departure of one of Hollywood's most celebrated friendships. For those who were close to them, the rift was a painful, inexplicable break. What had once been an unshakable bond between two men who had ruled the world together was now simply no more. And as the years passed, the public continued to speculate. Some thought that the pressures of fame had taken its toll on them both. Others believed that the two friends had simply outgrown each other. But the truth remained elusive, hidden behind the smiles and laughter and behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood.